Yeah. I'm very excited to be here today. Orly, this is so great to have you. And I was just telling Orly that as a Palestinian who grew up in Akka, Arabic is obviously my first language. Hebrew is my second language, right? And funnily enough, like, you have such kind of a mixed, complicated relationship with that language. When you're back home, you're exposed to the not so nice Hebrew, where, you know, as a Palestinian, as an Arab, you're constantly reminded that you are less and you should not speak Arabic, and you hear all these, you know, racial slurs in Hebrew. So Hebrew for me back home was like a trigger. It's like, oh, it's like something I have to live with. But after I left, it was something that reminded me of home. So every time I hear Hebrew, I just go there and I want to talk to people. So this is weird, right? But this is a part of the duality of being Palestinian in Israel and being a Palestinian and having to grow up and in an environment that is yours but rejects you constantly and constantly wants to remind you that you are not equal, right? I'm very thrilled that the Australian Jewish Democratic Society, they hold these kind of events, and why I'm here today. I'm here because I want to support that, and I want to see more events like that. I want to see more people like Orly, whom I share a lot of similarities with. Even though she's Jewish, I'm Palestinian, she's Israeli, I'm still Palestinian. But we have so much in common, and it's just sad to see that these commonalities and these experiences are destroyed to a certain extent, to a large extent, by politics and by politicians and by just people who have their own agenda and they want to promote their own agenda. So I'm happy to be here again, and I'll just turn the table to Orly.
Thank you so much. Is it okay from here, or do you? Yeah, it's okay. Okay. I think because if we are having a conversation, maybe it's easier than standing up each time.
I can sit here.
No, I think so. Yeah. So thank you for this amazing place, and it's wonderful. And I was listening to Noah speaking, and I think that on the invitation to the event it says something about a common vision. I think that it was.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Hi.
Got another one coming as well.
And I thought about how much it's not to be taken for granted that Noah is sitting next to me here and willing to speak about a common vision. Because, I mean, it sounds wonderful and it sounds, but I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that there is nothing obvious about the oppressor willing to share a common vision with their about the oppressed being willing to share a common vision with their oppressor. And it doesn't matter how good intentioned of an Israeli I can be, and and this is another thing that should be acknowledged, that I will always remain until, of course, the liberation that we are hoping for, which will not be only the liberation of the Palestinians, but also the liberation, I think, of Israelis from our awful role as oppressors. But until then, I am a part of the oppressing collective, and I think that it's really not to be taken for granted that we are sitting here today. So thank you for that. And we just found out earlier, we were having a conversation and we found out another common thing, that we actually both were nominated by the same it's the Palestinian Democratic National Assembly. Yeah, I think that's Tajamon, Balad. Both of us in a completely non-realistic places, which was, I mean, I think it was fine with both of us. But for me, being a Jewish activist in a Palestinian Democratic National Party was a tremendous experience. First, in being a minority, thank you. And there is a decent amount of humility, of humbleness that you acquire in that position, and I really relate from that place to what you said about the feeling, that how you feel towards Hebrew, for example, and I think through that experience it helped me understand how much those mechanism of oppression that are being used against Palestinians, how much they are actually being used against me as a Mizrahi. And for me, that's the main place that I, come to my politics. And if, we're thinking about shared visions, then I think, we should be able to imagine a shared Middle East or shared space in which our identity as Mizrahis, as Jews of the Arab Muslim environment, can be expressed without this downgrading constantly of the Arab identity. And I was wondering, I mean, I know that from a Palestinian perspective, or I'm wondering, what is the Mizrahi issue, how it sits with
Yes. Well, first of all, I'd like to address a point that you raised before. Just to clarify, I don't see Orly as my oppressor. I agree to do this because Orly is one of the people who acknowledge their privilege, and she assumes her responsibility in changing the injustice. And I see that there's a fair bit of potential for partnership, like real partnership. I'm not talking about coexist and let's hug each other and then go back to the army or go back to the checkpoint. No, I'm talking about genuine partnership. And I'm happy to live in Palestine. Again, as I said, I probably have more commonalities with Orly than Palestinians who haven't lived inside it. So again, but thanks. So I thank you for that, because that's also not an easy. It's not a given, and it's not something that it is easy for Jewish Israeli people to do, to kind of disengage themselves from the Zionist narrative, and at the same time take action and take responsibility and just acknowledge that. But to go to the question that you raised about Mizrahi and Arabness, and I think also there's it's also a sad story, because when I was studying at uni, I worked in a mall, shopping mall near my hometown. I was in a pizza place. I smelled like pizza every night. That's why I don't eat pizza. Sorry, Anna. 4 years. Anyways, but I lived in, my hometown is a quote-unquote mixed city. So there's Arabs and Jews. I had Jewish neighbors. And, we had very nice superficial relationship of good morning, good night. They came to my wedding. We went to their weddings. Having worked and having being exposed to Mizrahi as well as Ashkenazi Jews, for me, what I've sensed that, which is sad, because I also sensed it in some Palestinians, that there's a part of their identity was intentionally hidden. So, for example, even though they would speak Arabic, they would pretend not to understand or they would pretend not to speak Arabic. They would have to adopt a certain accent, right? They would have to, again, like food-wise and stuff. And so all these cultural, the Arab culture of their identity was made to be something that is not welcomed, and something that they should relinquish if they want to live under the Zionist framework or world, because because again, it's not something that you want to. You're too similar to the indigenous people, so you're too similar to Palestinians, and you're just too Arab, so you have to hide your Arabness. And again, I've also sensed that in some Arabs living in Palestine as well, in Israel. So, and then again, it's going back to that point of, what Zionism does not only to Palestinians but also to Arab Jews or Mizrahi Jews. Like for me, it's connected, or it's linked to European supremacy, right? It's a project that, like you were saying, it's curated for Europeans. It's a European project. It's a Western Jewish supremacist project, right? And I think here it's important for us to talk about the diversity of Jewish people and what it means to be a Jewish person, right? Because very often people conflate being Jewish with being Zionist, right? And then you say, oh, but you can't, you can't criticize Zionism because then you're anti-Semitic. And this is something that I sensed. I know I'm making lots of people here uncomfortable. But you know what? I'm Palestinian. I've been uncomfortable my whole life. Bear with me, right? And it's something that even some Palestinians that I sensed here or not here, in the diaspora, also kind of like, oh, I don't want to go there. It's a bit, I'm like, no. Again, we are Arabs, right? For me, as a Palestinian, and as a Muslim, I can relate to Judaism from so many point of view, from so many angles, right? Judaism was always a part of my surrounding and my landscape. It's a part of my culture. When Muslims pray, they pray for Ibrahim, right? It's mentioned in the Quran so many times. I grew up believing that my culture is based on Jewish and Christian, Middle Eastern culture. So I think it's okay also as Palestinians for us to go out and say, we have a problem with Zionism. And here is why. It is because it's a settler colonial ideology that's created structures that are based on war crimes, human rights violation, crimes against humanity. And as a Palestinian, I don't have to pretend. Even, so what? People, you're scared. People are going to call you names and try to evoke guilt that is not there for you. Like, I'm Palestinian. I'm not European, right? My ancestors, they've hid their neighbors. They tried to hide their neighbors and protect them during World War II. There's Palestinians who went and fought against the Nazis. So that's not something we have to get defensive, for. And that's what I tell all the Palestinians. That no, this is, again, that kind of line of arguments doesn't work with us, okay? And I think it's important, it's very important, not just for us to keep pushing against Zionism, but anyone who believes in equality, in global values, in justice, in human rights, who believes in, people should be able to live in their ancestral lands. If you are a pro-indigenous rights, then that means that you should be also pro-Palestinian rights, right? So I think for me, I'm always happy to go there. I know it's very uncomfortable, but we can't just pretend that we can't just keep beating around the bushes and not tackle the real issue here. The real issue here is that we have a settler colonial project that has established structures and systems that subjugate and oppress millions of people. That's the real issue.
I always say that probably the only place today in the world that still knows how to make the distinction between Jews and Zionism is Iran, is the Iranian regime. Really, I mean, I still have a lot of family in Iran. By the way, the biggest Jewish community outside Israel in the Middle East is in Iran until today. Yes, the big demon, and but they're actually, I mean, the Jewish school in which I studied, my cousin's children are going to school today. They have their synagogue. They have representatives in the Iranian parliament. There's a Jewish seat. There are less than 20,000 Jews out of a population of 80 million, and they have a seat in the parliament. So it's not an anti-Semite regime. It is a very anti-Zionist regime, which is fair enough, but they still know to, differentiate between the two, something that in a very manipulated way was erased, everywhere else. It's not by accident. It's a well manipulated political maneuver to erase this distinction between Judaism and Zionism. And I think I often think about the price that Judaism itself pays for that. I mean, there's no doubt that the first victims of Zionism are the Palestinians, no doubt about that. But I always think also about the Judaism itself being a victim of that project, because I think that the role that Zionism imposed on Judaism, being the gatekeeper of the Jewish democratic state, is a horrible role, because in that project you want your gatekeeper to be as strict as possible, and therefore Judaism in Israel today cannot be anything but a very rigid, very closed and suspicious and conservative, extremely conservative version of itself, because this is its role. And therefore we have, there is of course no marriage outside church in Israel, but it means that it reflects on everything. It reflects on women's rights, the gay community rights, of course, and many other aspects of our lives as Jews in Israel, because our Judaism is now captured, is not captivated by, in the hands of the state, and we can only consume it in this form. The Reform Judaism has no status in Israel. Not any of the other options of. It's just the ultra-Orthodox Judaism with all that comes with it. But it's constructed in such a way that you have no way out, because if you accept that there are the pluralism, if the state accepts that, then it loses its very strict gatekeeper, which is, obviously will collapse. The entire project will collapse if they lose that. That's It's pretty bad. We came back to Israel after spending a few years in the States, and we came back in the summer of 2014 straight to the war on Gaza. And after a couple of days, I asked my husband, has it always been that crazy here, or did I just forget? It was really awful. The only thing when all that catastrophe was going on, my daughters went to the bilingual school, the Jewish Arab school in Jerusalem.
Can I ask you, Orly, just to explain to everyone about the school? It's
one of the only places that Jewish and Palestinian kids can actually meet and study together. The first one was in Jerusalem. That's our school. We have two teachers in each classroom, one Jewish, one Palestinian. Each speaks in her own language, so kids speak pretty decently both languages. and it's just that they become friends. I mean, and that's their lives. That's their. So we had a weekly walk, not even a demonstration. Just, Palestinian and Jewish families and children with our children, like there were kids around. Just walking. Jerusalem was at its worst at that time. I mean, everything was so heated and people were really like looking for blood. But we just walked in this rail frame that is not in use anymore. It's just a walk and wearing T-shirts that had Hebrew and Arabic wording on them. Hand in hand, that's the name of the school, and that's all that it said on the T-shirt, like hand in hand in Arabic and in Hebrew. That was it, and a picture of like a drawing of. We were attacked so severely that from the second time we did that, we needed police escort throughout the. And then it got so bad that the organizers from the school themselves asked us that when we dispersed after the walk, please put something on your T-shirt because we don't want you to be walking by yourselves in the streets of Jerusalem. And I remember so clearly that when we wanted to go back, my daughter was quite young at the time. And I told her, well, look, and she said, no, I'm not going to hide that, I'm not going, and she was so, and we had people shouting and cursing at us all the way home, but I mean, it got, I think it's worse. Yeah, worse. Yeah, it's really getting worse. It's really getting worse. And going back to that, the Zionist Jewish thing, it's a terrible catch because they put us, the Jewish citizens of Israel, they put us in a place where Zionism itself at this point can offer you no way out. But if you dare to think outside the Zionist box, they call you self-hating Jew or self-anti-Zionist, because if you're outside Zionism, then you're outside Judaism, and then you're a self-hating. So it's a catch-22. There is no way out. They really engineered it so perfectly that you have to proactively work very, very hard to find ways out of this box of horrors, basically.
But the weird thing is that it's new, because I got here and I start talking to people Jews that are Australian Jews, and I realized that it wasn't always that. Like, I met someone who was actually in the Bunds or something, what they call skip or something.
Non-Zionist youth movement.
And apparently non-Zionist Jews was very logical thing to be, I don't know, 50 years ago.
No, but that was just because Zionism was invisible, maybe, or not so much. And even in Israel today, a lot of people who are clearly have no problem with the Israeli state's actions, they'll say things like, "Oh, but I'm not Zionist." Or, "What are you talking about? I haven't thought about Zionism in 100 years." It's not even, what's Zionism? Yeah. It's not really here. And so it's completely invisible at the same time that it's the dominant regime.
The most interesting responses were from the Palestinian audiences, not the Jewish ones so much. For them to hear a Jewish perspective, explaining why me as a Jew, and I am very much Jewish in my identity, would run for a Palestinian national party who was running this election with the Islamic party. So, I'm not Palestinian, I'm not Muslim, and I was, with the National Islamic Palestinian Alliance. But so that conversation was much more educating for me and much more interesting for me. Jewish audiences, I could have expected every single reaction and response. they send you to Gaza, they sent me to Gaza, and I say, but I can't go to Gaza, they won't let me. I actually really want to go to Gaza and see what's going on there, but they won't let me.
That's a curse in Israel.
Yeah,
that's
go to
When
Gaza.
someone is like so terrible, they say, go to Gaza. And we're like, well, we can't.
We want to, but we
Sure.
Exactly. Like, I can't. I honestly really want to go to Gaza, but they won't allow. So that's the usual.
Is there a way?